Hi, welcome to Color Mixing Essentials Part 2. In this section, I'm going to be covering tints and shades and how to lighten and darken and change a color. Before I go into that though, I wanted to quickly go over a couple of terms in color theory. You should have printed out, should have all this printed out. This is page 3. So you want to make sure you have this for this section. So the first term I want to go over is hue. Hue is another term for color. So if we were to go back to the color wheel, each one of these is its own separate hue. So orange is a orange hue, blue is a blue hue, yellow is a hue. So in other words, hue is color. And then the next term I want to go over is saturation. So when it comes to saturation, it's really the amount of hue that's in that color. So when you're mixing color, you can actually change the amount of saturation. So what I mean saturation, here's an example. For example, this is 100% red. And as I add gray to it, it begins to shift the saturation. In other words, there's less and less red that happens as I start changing that color with gray. Another example here, and this is complementary colors, this will be covered in part 3. Yellow is 100% saturation, it's 100% hue, and as I added purple, it began to desaturate the yellow, meaning there is less and less yellow as you start to mix more and more purple. Another example, and this is getting into tints and shades, is that when you start adding white to a hue or color, that will also modify the saturation. So as you add white, it becomes less and less saturated with the 100% blue. Same with the black. So I wanted to go over those 3 terms. So I will be using that off and on throughout the course. So when it comes to tints and shades, and on your chart here is a really good example. A tint is when you add white to a color to lighten it. So for example, this is white and this is blue. And as I added I started with blue. As I added white, it started to lighten. It started to tint the blue. So tint is adding white. And then I'm going to jump to shade. Shade is adding black. So when I started adding black to the red, it started to become darker. So this is considered shade. Then there's tone, and tone is in between, which is kind of a mixture. You're going to be mixing gray and then adding that to the hue. So here's an example. This is I added gray, so I mixed the gray and then added it to red, and then that gave it a tone of red. So we're going to go over that. You're going to actually paint, you're going to actually create these scales, which is what I call scales, and we're going to do tints and shades and tones. And then also what we're going to start out with is this is a really good basic exercise to start getting the feel of what happens when you start adding color to white or black. And we're going to do a few different shades of gray, and this is really, this is 100% white, this is 100% black, and this is just 5 stages in between. So that's what you're going to be doing. What you're also going to be doing is doing an exercise where you actually are modifying the color with white, getting different tints of that color, and painting shapes. And this is a good exercise because when you paint, say, a red that has more white and less white, you can really see next to each other, you start to really see the shift in the tint. Same thing with the shades. We're going to do the same exact thing with the shades. You start to really see the shift in the hue as you add black. And when you're painting these different shades next to each other, you start really learning the subtleties of the change in color. Okay? So I'm going to go over how to prep up your watercolor pages. Okay, I'm going to show you how to start prepping your watercolor tiles for this exercise. So you're going to take a sheet of your watercolor paper and just simply cut strips. Cut them in strips. This is really two inches wide, and it's the full length of the sheet. And just keep cutting a bunch of them. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can either cut it with a cutting mat cutter, or X-Acto cutter, X-Acto knife, or scissors, as long as you have a couple of strips of this. Now, you really technically need 3, but it's good to have extra because it's just good to have extra in case you want to keep practicing. So that's what I've done here. And that is going to be for this exercise. For the other section, which is when you're painting your little puzzle pieces, I cut these tiles exactly out of the watercolor paper, and these are 4 inches by 4 inches. And these are a little bigger, but this is actually smaller, so it'll be much easier to paint. And what I'm going to show you is how you're going to create that puzzle design on your tiles. So you have a couple of different options. It really is whatever you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I just did this little design here, very simple, sort of half circles and intersecting each other. But I'm going to show you how to do this because this is much easier to do. So what I did is this one I really just marked each inch across and then rotated it and did the inch down. And then again, remember we line up the edge of the triangle to the edge of the paper and just start to draw lines down. And rotate it and do the same for the other side. And this will give you an instant grid to work from. You can do that as well. This one was very easy. I just drew diagonal lines. Now one of the things I want you to keep in mind is don't make these very small, tiny, intricate shapes because it just becomes difficult to paint. And I want you really to get the meat of this exercise, which is to get a sense of how to mix color by adding white and black and changing that color. So I'm making sure that these shapes are very easy. So I'm just really just doing, dividing some of these shapes into sections. Okay, so you want to do 3 of these. You can do actually a grid from the tints. Maybe you did a diamond for the triangles. Maybe you did for your shades, and then you can do another grid for that for the tones. So make sure you have 3 tiles altogether. Okay? So let's get started painting. So get your paints out. We're going to go ahead and get our paints ready. Okay, we're going to start with our grayscale. And what you might want to do is either have a paper towel to put underneath your watercolor paper, or you could even do like a piece of newsprint, just so that, because you're going to actually be painting off the edges, so you want to make sure you don't get that on your table. You'll notice, so we're going to start with white and black. And you'll notice I have more white than I do black. Again, we have to remember that the dominant color is really going to change the lighter color very quickly. So you want to make sure you have enough white for this exercise. So what you want to do is you get your tile, your strips, and we're going to work with a medium-sized brush, and just so that we can get the full width of those sections. So your first color is going to be white, and I know this feels strange painting white on white, but this is just to give you for your color skill, the section of white. So you just want to do the top section, pure white. And then what we're going to do is we're going to slowly mix. Now you notice I'm not getting a whole lot of black in there, because that black is going to shift that white very quickly. So I'm putting just a hint of black to get the next level. And this is when we start getting into gray, because we're going to create a scale that actually moves from white to black. And in between that, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades in between, again, 100% black, 100% white. Another thing to keep in mind is acrylic does tend to look lighter when it's wet and dries darker. So that's something to always keep in mind when you're working with acrylic. So then I'm going to mix a little bit more white. I'm going to just butt the next color right up to the white. So you can see I'm painting a swatch of gray. Now, if you feel like, you can see that shift is a big jump, I might want to actually lighten that. And as long as it's still kind of wet, I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit more white to that. And just go right over it, just to make it a little lighter. Yeah, that's good. Now another thing I want to remind you is when you're mixing color, make sure that you really get the bristles down. What happens is that the previous color will start to accumulate closer to the base of the bristles, and you want to make sure that all gets mixed in there. Okay, so now I'm going to go a shade darker. I just added more black. Again, be careful that you don't add too much black, because you notice the way that I'm mixing here is I'm slowly adding a little bit at a time so that I can control it. Because one of the mistakes, and trust me, I have done this many times and I still do this on occasion, is I get this blob of color mixing and it just grows and grows, and then I have this amount of paint of color that I don't want. So always good to start slow with small amounts. Okay, that looks a little darker, so I'm going to paint that next. So that's stage 2 from white. And then I'm going to go a little darker. Now what I do is I test it and I say, well, you know what? That actually looks very similar to that. So I need to go darker on that. Now, if you put down a swash of color and you think it's not dark enough, it's okay. You can just go ahead and go on to the next one. It doesn't have to be the exact next step up. Remember, this is really an exercise for you to get familiar with tinting your color. Okay, so you can see how that is darker. And now we're going to add more black. Again, I'm really mixing that into the bristles. This should be darker. Now I'm trying to get close to the neck, the swatch of color that I painted, and getting, making sure I don't have a whole lot of white of the paper showing, because that gives me a clear idea if that is the correct next step. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to do another one. And this one's going to be really a lot darker because we want to get pretty close to black at this point. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next one is going to be your black. So what you're going to do, because you have so much gray in here still, we're going to get a new brush. I'm going to put this in the cup of water. And we're going to get a new brush. And the reason why is because we want the next level that we paint on here, or the last level that we paint on here, needs to be 100% pure black. So that's why I'm getting a brand new brush that's clean. And I'm just getting straight out of the tube black and painting that on there. There you go. You got your first grayscale. So one of the things that you might want to do is have a dryer on hand to dry that. And because as we start painting with color, hue, we're going to have to maybe sometimes paint a second coat to get that pure color. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go with tone. So the reason why I'm jumping to tone is because we kind of have this palette of gray already. And going back to your sheet, tone, so we completed doing a grayscale with tint. So we tinted black, right? This is considered a tint of black. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually start doing tone with gray, adding gray to a hue. So I'm going to use red as the hue, and since I already have black and white here, I can mix a gray for the tone. So put aside your grayscale and get a new strip of watercolor paper, and I'm going to add red to my palette here. And before I start painting, I'm going to go ahead and mix a batch of gray. So that's what you want to do, is mix a batch of gray. And the shade of gray that you're shooting for is probably this one, which is a middle gray. And that's what we're going to be adding to our color. So I'm really going to mix a batch of that. Okay, so I have some of that already done. And then I'm going to get a new brush for my red. So we're going to start out with 100% hue, which is 100% red. Now you could do this with blue, but for this example I'm going to do red. So I'm going to paint my first swatch with 100% red. And if you'll notice, there's a translucency to this red, so I'm going to take my dryer and dry that first coat. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a second coat of red so that I can really get more saturation. Remember, saturation is the amount of hue in that color. So that feels very saturated. Now what I'm going to do is slowly add gray to that red, because we are actually desaturating this color. So you can see how the gray really shifted that red. Next one, I'm going to add more gray. Now, you know, with this grayscale I had 5 in between, but if you end up with less than that, because certain colors can shift very quickly. And here I only have 4. That's okay. That's okay to do, because I want you guys just to have the exercise. And this is something that you can repeat on your own. So you can see how we're desaturating the red with the gray. Now I'm adding quite a bit of gray to the red, because we're getting closer to more and more gray. Another thing too is this is a really good exercise to understand how when you add a color to gray, it really changes. Like this is almost feels kind of a lavender mauve. Now here's a good example of how the previous color got pushed up to the base of the bristles. I'm making sure that I'm actually pressing that in there. Okay, next one is, so that looks pretty close to gray already. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take this brush, since I have that pre-mixed pure gray with no red in it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and do a swatch of that. There you go. So now you have a scale that shows tone. Okay, so you want to go ahead and clean your brushes, and we're going to move on to tints. Okay, we're going to do tints, a tint scale, just like we did with the gray scale, but we're going to use a color this time. So you want to get a brand new strip of watercolor paper, and I'm going to again use red, since I already have red on my palette, and we're going to tint red. So what we're going for is, remember on here, this one I used blue, and we created a scale from blue to white, and we have 5 shades of tints in between. So that's what we're shooting for. So we're going to go ahead and first do our first swatch of red. Again, this gets very translucent, so I'm going to dry it. And then now I'm going to start tinting that red. So I'm going to start adding white to that red. Now you don't have to use red, you could use the blue as well. And the reason why I'm also having you use a primary color for this exercise is it makes it easier. You don't have to pre-mix a secondary color or tertiary color. So that should be a lighter shade of red. I'm going to make sure that is a lighter shade. And make sure that it's really not, it's a step from this 100% red and not too much of a jump. So I'm basically going through the same process as the grayscale, but we're doing red. And we're shooting for 5 stages, so keep that in mind as you're mixing. So again, I put that down. Is that looking too similar to that? Well, maybe I might want to add a little bit more white to that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3. I actually have 2 more to get to white. You'll notice at this stage I'm not adding a whole lot of red to my mixture, but I'm adding mostly white to get that tint. Now again, if you have a hard time getting that next scale, that next level, and then you find yourself continuing to mix very similar values or tints, that's okay. Just keep doing it until you feel like you got the next stage, the next step lighter. Okay, so this is my last level, so I'm going to mix a lot of white in there so that there's just a hint of red, and you can see now we're pretty pink at this point. And you want that to be very light, like there's only a hint of red in there. Now the story that I tell my students is when I was in art school, they had us do like 20 shades or 20 levels, but I'm having you guys just do 5. Okay, so my last swatch, again, is going to be white. So I'm going to get a new brush, so I have 100% white on that bristle. And I know, white on white, but it's good. We need to paint that white on there. Okay. Good job. So now we have a tint scale of color. The next thing we're going to do is shades. So I'm going to do again red, using black to shade or darken the color. So you get a new strip of watercolor paper. I already have black on here, but I want to make sure that I don't get any white, because then we're going to end up, you know, in the same area of tone. So we want to make sure that we get a new brush or a clean brush, and really I'm going to actually move this red here so that that doesn't get any white. Okay, so start out by doing a swatch of red. Okay, so the next step is going to be a shade darker. So I'm going to start adding black. Now, remember what I said about dominant colors. Black is probably the most dominant color on the scale. So you want to add only a small, tiny amount, because this will dominate the red very quickly. And you just want to get a stage darker than the 100% red. Another thing too is the even if you use blue for this exercise, black is so dominant that it's hard to even get those 5 stages. So, you know, try your best. I can already tell that I need more red. And that looks very similar, so we might have to add. more black. I also just dipped the edge of the brush in that black. And you can see I put too much black here and it really dominated over that red. So I'm going to actually mix to the side here since I have too much black in there. And we're really going burgundy with this because it's really shifting this red. So the next stage here will be pretty close to black. And probably on your screen, these might look very similar, but they are subtle in terms of shift. Okay, so this one probably on your screen looks pretty black, but it is brown. It's almost brown, very deep brown burgundy. Okay, so I'm going to do the next one is 100% black. So I'm going to get a new brush. So I know it's really hard to see on the screen, but there is a subtle shift from that shade to black. Okay, great. So now you have completed your tints and shades. So we're going to move on to your puzzle pieces. Okay, we're going to start working on our puzzle pieces, and let's start off with doing tints. So again, tints is adding white to red. So you want to go ahead and do that. Make sure you have some white and red. Or if you want to even do this exercise with blue, you can do that as well. I'm going to, again, I still have red on my palette, so I'm going to go ahead and use red. I'm using a smaller brush this time, and I'm going to just do one swatch 100% red. Let's just do that first. And then now I'm going to add a little bit of white to that red. And it doesn't matter what scale it is or what tint it is, as long as it's a different color, a different tint in between that. As long as it's different. It doesn't have to be, oh, I have to do the next scale or the next step lighter. No, it just has to be different. So, and when I mean different, you can tell this is 100% red. And I tinted it with white, and now I have a different tint of that red. So when I paint this one, I want to do maybe something darker, maybe something in between. And the main objective of this exercise is to get you practicing mixing color with those subtle changes. And in this exercise, we're really just using white to make those changes. And actually, I like this tint of red, so I might do it in another place. I might do it here. Okay, I'm going to go lighter. And let's go really light on the next one, I think. And you can tell I'm rotating this. You don't have to keep it in one position. This makes it easier for you to paint your little puzzle pieces. Now these two are kind of similar, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to probably have to go pretty close to red. So you can see I'm going back and forth. Again, you want to make sure that you try to overlap that and have no paper showing through. Okay, so let's do something very light. Now I'm actually going to go really light on this one because there are some similarities in the shade, in the tints here. This is why it's really good to have more brushes, extra brushes around, so you can go back and forth without stopping to wash it. Okay, so we'll just do one more here. And that's it. Now you can, feel free to do this exercise with different primary colors. And if you want to do it with a secondary color, feel free to do that. You can mix again, like for example, orange and then do white to orange. Okay, so let's move on to shades. So now we're going to do shades. I'm going to paint one square. I'm using this pattern for this exercise. I'm going to paint one square red. And then I'm going to start adding black to that. And remember how quick black will darken that color, will darken red. So this is a really good exercise to learn how to control your paint. You'll see that I'm actually painting these out of order. It's kind of like a game. You're trying to figure out what would be the next shade in the next square. So you want to go ahead and fill this entire puzzle with different levels of shades with the red until you've completed the whole thing. Okay? So you'll notice that I didn't do tones in the puzzle pieces, and that's optional. That's really up to you if you want to go ahead and do that to get extra practice. But we're going to be moving on to part 3.